the chillest dictator of all time. Most dictators have a look. You know the one, the military uniform with the chest full of medals they awarded themselves. The giant portrait hanging in every public building. The permanent scowl that says, "I have absolute power and I would like everyone to be aware of that at all times." Franz Albert René did not have the look. He had expensive loafers and a button-down shirt. He ran a country from a tropical island paradise and seemed, by most accounts, to genuinely enjoy being there. He overthrew a government, disappeared political opponents, built a socialist state, laundered money for the Italian mafia, offered legal immunity to foreign criminals, and somehow left behind a country that today ranks as the richest in Africa per capita, with the highest literacy rate on the continent, free healthcare, free education, and a quality of life that makes most of its neighbors look like a different planet. This is the story of Seychelles, a collection of islands so small and so beautiful that most people know it only as a honeymoon destination. And it's the story of the man who ruled it for 27 years and turned it, against all reasonable expectations, into something that actually worked. Sort of. First, some geography, because the Seychelles is genuinely one of the strangest places on Earth to have a political history worth talking about. The country is an archipelago of over 100 islands scattered across the Indian Ocean, north of Madagascar. Of those 100-plus islands, 99% of the population lives on just 3. The vast majority live on Mahé, a single island you can drive from one end to the other in under an hour. The capital city, Victoria, has a population of around 20,000 people, which makes it roughly the size of a mid-sized university campus. This is the country that had its own coup, its own counter-coup, its own Truth and Reconciliation Commission, its own mafia connections, its own ideological pivot from socialist dictatorship to liberal democracy. In a place with 60,000 people. It would be like if a small cottage town in the middle of nowhere decided to have a geopolitical era. The British administered the Seychelles for around 150 years, having seized it from the French partly because the French kept letting pirates use it as a base of operations, which honestly tracks. The colonial economy ran on slave labor, then indentured labor, then plantation agriculture, coconuts, vanilla, cinnamon. By the time independence became a real conversation in the 1960s and 70s, the islands had developed a genuinely mixed population. A Creole culture blending African, European, Indian, and Chinese heritage, and an economy that was, by any measure, not particularly impressive. Then the airport opened. Tourism arrived almost immediately, and things got complicated. 2 men dominated Seychellois politics in the run-up to independence, and they could not have been more different. James Mancham was the first president, a man who appeared to treat the job as a pleasant bonus to a life already dedicated to international socializing. He loved Britain, loved women, loved parties, and at some point found the time, while serving as head of state, to judge the Miss World beauty pageant. He was not always taken seriously. This turned out to be a significant miscalculation by everyone involved. Franz Albert René was the opposite. Born into a modest white family that administered a coconut plantation, he grew up watching the island's old French land-owning elite, the Grand Blancs, control everything that mattered. He left for England for school, came back to practice law, left again to work in banking, and ended up in Jersey doing offshore finance. Jersey, for those unfamiliar, is essentially Britain's version of a tax haven for wealthy people who prefer their money not to be looked at too closely. International outrage forced the act to be revoked 5 years later. By then, it had served its purpose. One of René's key allies was a man named Mario Ricci, previously expelled from Italy, Switzerland, and Somalia, who arrived in the Seychelles and befriended René. Together, they created the Seychelles Trust Company, a state vehicle that assisted foreign companies and investors with navigating local bureaucracy. It also assisted them, rather less officially, with money laundering, tax evasion, and moving funds of uncertain origin to places where those funds would face fewer questions. René worked with the Gambino crime family. He gave mafia members refuge on the islands. He used organized crime connections the way other heads of state use diplomatic back channels. He was, in his own words, red on the outside but green on the inside. It was an admirably honest description of a man whose socialism never got in the way of taking money from wherever it was offered. The late 1980s brought 3 separate coup attempts. One funded by apartheid South Africa, which was using the Seychelles as an offshore financial center to evade Western sanctions, and took it personally when Rene threatened to cut ties. The most memorable involved a group of South African mercenaries who arrived disguised as a touring drinking club called the Ye Ancient Order of Froth Blowers. Their weapons were discovered at customs. After a brief shootout, they hijacked an Air India flight and escaped back to South Africa, where nearly all of them were quietly released. By the early 1990s, with the Soviet Union gone and apartheid collapsing, Rene made a calculation that most ideologues in his position could not bring themselves to make. He decided to stop being a dictator. Not because of popular pressure, not because of a revolution, because the IMF and World Bank would not lend money to an authoritarian single-party state without conditions, and the conditions included becoming a democracy. Rene wanted the loans, so he drafted a new constitution, introduced multi-party elections, allowed genuine opposition candidates, and proceeded to win every single election he entered anyway. The irony of his final years in power is that the country he was running looked increasingly like the vision his old rival Mancham had held all along. A liberal, tourist-driven, offshore finance-friendly economy that happened to have an excellent social safety net. He had spent 2 decades fighting the model, tried unsuccessfully to replace it with something else, and eventually concluded that it worked and adopted it himself. He stepped down in 2004 at age 68, saying he was simply too old to continue, a statement that no other African leader of his era would have made with a straight face. His party remained in power until 2020. He died in 2019, the same year a Truth and Reconciliation Commission began publicly documenting the full details of what his regime had done. The Seychelles today is still the wealthiest country in Africa by GDP per capita. It still has the best healthcare and education outcomes on the continent. It still runs on tourism, offshore finance, and fishing. The same 3 pillars Rene eventually, reluctantly accepted as the foundation of everything. Most people who visit have no idea any of this happened. They see the beaches, the granite boulders, the impossibly clear water, and the relaxed pace of island life and think it has always been this way. It has not always been this way. It was built by a man in expensive loafers who overthrew a government, suppressed an opposition, laundered money for organized crime, offered legal immunity to foreign criminals, built a functioning welfare state, changed his entire ideology when the evidence demanded it, and stepped down voluntarily when he decided he was old enough to enjoy the beaches himself. History rarely produces people who are easy to categorize. Franz Albert Rene is not easy to categorize. He is, however, almost certainly the chillest dictator of all time. If you thought dictatorship always meant poverty and ruin, the Seychelles just broke that assumption completely. Subscribe for more stories about the leaders and countries that history forgot to make complicated.